It's also great to be back. I really appreciate that. It's been a while since I was able to speak to you guys. And since I changed roles, I used to be a PFE the last time I think I visited you. I am now in the identity division working as a developer advocate PM. And I wanted to talk to you about the Microsoft Identity Platform today, introduce a few things, take some questions and show you what has actually just landed as a GA for .NET developers, which is super exciting stuff. If you do have questions, let me just open my questions or chat so I can see if anyone has questions while I'm presenting this one. I want to make sure that you can interact me and ask me stuff while we go. So first, a few things about me, which I think I already did anyway, but let's see. Program manager at Microsoft. You can reach out to me on Twitter anytime you want to ask about things. And hopefully I can inspire you today to write better and more secure code at the end of the session. My partner calls me the epitome of toxic positivity because we get up at 6 a.m. to do streaming and I'm always positive and energetic. So there you go. And I'm always passionate about technology. So I like to learn and dabble with new things, not just the ones I'm feeling comfortable with, being outside my comfort zone. I usually do quite a bit of streaming with my partner in crime, JP, who's not here today. We stream at Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, so you can find us at the 4 to 5 show. And we talk about identity and development across all languages and platforms. So you can find us doing identity with AWS and Java. We can be doing Google Cloud with Node and Azure with Node, not in this exact order. But any language, any platform, we love to support them, and we're always learning on the stream. Today, we're doing PowerShell, and we failed miserably, so that shows how much fun you can have online. Now, why would you not want to store your users' credentials? And when I usually do this session in person, which has been a very long time, I would ask the classic question. How many of you have tried to roll out your own authentication and user management system? I will raise my hand. And I even remember the year, it was 2007. There you go. Quite a few hands there from what I can see. And I got it horribly wrong. It was very hard to do it. And every time I would do it, I was like, oh, I need to do a backup logic because I don't want my site to be bombarded. And then I had to set up user password resets and what have you. What we're finding is that a lot of companies are still doing it wrong. So we don't want you to be one of these or any of these. If you know Troy Hunt, if you had the chance to come across Troy Hunt and you know that he's got a website called Have I Been Pwned, which actually takes dumps from websites that have been compromised and the user information made available, and he posts it on his website. As you can see, we're nearing 10 billion unique accounts across the globe from different websites that have been compromised. And as you can see here, we have customers across the globe, customers across all different industries, from pizzas to MSNBC to Dropbox to Apple. We want to make sure that you are not one of these companies. So how can we allow you to do that? Obviously, I work for Microsoft, so we do have our own solution. It's called Azure AD, or the Microsoft Identity Platform, and that encompasses Active Directory and Active Directory B2C. And I'll talk about the flavors a little bit. But just to go back to why do you not want to implement your own solution? Obviously, if you are creating a site for your friend and you're thinking, you know what, it's only going to be a username and password. He's going to store it somewhere. He's only going to have 10 users. That's great. Again, that's 10 users that you might compromise data. But think about the scalability of the system. As a developer, you don't want to think about how is my user database going to scale? How is my identity system going to scale? How am I going to add MFA? How much money am I going to spend for MFA and emails and notifications or what have you? What I love about our platform is they can start very small. You can have 1 user or 5 users using the system and scale out to 30 billion. As you can see, we're doing 30 billion authentication requests per day. That's an insane number of requests. And your app will never have to worry about whether you have 1 user or 10,000 users or a million users. Hopefully you have a million users and you have that problem, but we have 1,500 dedicated engineers working day and night to make sure that your solution scales and your solution stays safe. And I don't want you to spend 3 weeks learning about OpenID Connect. I don't want you to spend three months trying to understand how OAuth2 works or what the flows are, or if you need to know about the flows. I want you to quickly add a little bit of code and be successful. Keep dropping you in the pit of success, as I would like to say. Drop kicking? Yeah. So what do developers usually ask about identity? Can I leverage my company's existing identity? Most likely, yes. If your company has Office, they already have Azure AD. Most companies don't even know that, which is scary when it comes to it. So you have Office 365, have an Azure AD tenant. You have Azure, have Azure AD. You don't have any of these, you still can use Azure AD, because even though it's Azure AD, it's neither Azure and it's neither AD. It's a separate product. It lives under the umbrella of Azure AD, but you don't need Azure to have Azure AD, and you don't need to have extensive knowledge of AD. How quickly can you get started? Hopefully after today, you'll see that it's extremely easy to get started, and I will prove the point. Does it support or integrate well with my existing platform and languages I use? Yes, we have languages, and we support all the platforms and all the languages out there, at least the major ones. And if for the ones that we don't support out of the box with our official libraries, you can use any other compatible library, OpenID Connect library. And does it support advanced security out of the box? Yes. If any of you had ever to implement password resets, multi-factor authentication, over using hardware keys, then you'll know that it's extremely hard to configure and edit that. I don't want you to be an expert in encryption. I don't want you to be an expert in and hashing and what have you. I want you to be good at your job. And as we know, there's no identity developers unless for the people that work for us. So there's no one that does identity day in, day out unless you work in a company like ours. So for your task, when it comes to create a site, whether it's a line of business site or a website, an application that has to communicate with, say, Azure or a database, or whether you're creating a website for your friend, like a forum, then authentication is a small component of that, a very important small component, but it's one of the 30 tasks that you have to do. So I don't want you to be spending a month trying to implement authentication when you can be doing other stuff like adding value to your business. So when it comes to the Microsoft Identity Platform, we do have quite a few things to help you be successful. We reduce the sign-in friction. In effect, we redirect the user to a different page. They authenticate, they come back. You don't have access to their data. You have access to their token information, which allows you to interact with that user object. We give you access to organizational data, whether that's APIs or already inside your system, or whether you're using things like Microsoft Graph to communicate to OneDrive, SharePoint, or what have you. We give you really good support for IT. So as a developer, you're not always managing your IT. Small companies will probably have that. Like as a developer, I had to do some IT support as well and manage AD clouds. But in many organizations, there are separate IT teams that manage the users and the compliance. So what we want to allow you to do is, as a developer, to quickly tap into these things. So you create an app in Azure AD. They have full access of the users and the groups. All you get back is the tokens that you need to work with. And finally, safeguarding access. There are so many things that we implement day in, day out to secure the user data. You don't have to worry about these things. All you have to worry about is how is your application accessing that information, and how is it using it to authorize the users out of the box. Again, especially for .NET, it's extremely easy and straightforward to use it. There are a couple of libraries that I'll show you how you need to add the authentication, but other than that, pretty straightforward. Now, getting started with the platform as a developer, what are you going to do? There are two major components. One is the app registration. You go into the Azure Active Directory portal or the B2C portal, and you create an app registration that shows the intent that you're going to interact with the Azure AD tenant. That says your application, I'm going to be accessing some user information. And you can do that via the portal, or you can do it programmatically via the API if you want to automate the task. Now that you have the app registration in the AD portal, you need to add some code. That code will speak to the Azure AD, will get some user information down, either using the Microsoft authentication libraries or using any other library. People that already have OpenID Connect solutions out there, they don't have to check out all that code and bring our libraries in. They can actually use any OpenID Connect certified library. If you are brand new to the Microsoft Identity Platform, then we recommend that you start with MSAL for both clients and services, because it has all that functionality built in there. You don't have to worry about that. And there's a good chance that your app just doesn't authenticate users. If it does, then you're done with this and you can move on. But if you need to call into other APIs, your own APIs, Azure APIs, or Graph APIs, then we also give you the ability to configure that inside the Azure AD app registration. So you can have a full end-to-end secure solution from beginning to end. And then, depending on what you want to build, there are two flavors. The Azure AD solution allows you to create line of business applications, anything that has to do with organizational solutions, and also schools. So if you are building a sales inventory solution for your company, then you'll be using Azure AD. But we also have the B2C solution, the business to consumer. This is the more commercial one. So if you're building a mobile app that you want your users to log in, if you're building a forum for your friend, if you're building a solution for your cousin and you want to bring some users in, we allow you to have a simple username and username and password database that integrates with your solution across any language, or you can bring their social media accounts into that solution. So for B2C, you can also allow your users to authenticate with, say, Google or Facebook or their Twitter account. So they don't have to create a brand new account for that. And finally, the nice thing about our platform is that it's not locking you in. It uses open standards. So OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, SAML and Scheme. So for us, it's come as you are, bring whatever tools you want, and have fun with our library. There you go, come as you are. I like that. Because, as I said, we like to have fun with things that are not Microsoft. As you can see here, there's nothing Microsoft at all from what we're doing. We have Bitbucket, IntelliJ, PyCharm. Use anything you want, any cloud, any language, and create any solution you want. It can be on serverless, it can be Kubernetes, it can be bare metal. We want you to create secure solutions no matter where they are. Now, if you're a Microsoft fanboy like me and you like to work with Azure and Visual Studio and all the solutions, then there's an added benefit of using the Microsoft Identity Platform. If you're developing locally, you can use managed identities to authenticate against Azure without really having to pass any usernames and passwords. A lot of services on Azure also leverage managed identities, so you have this kind of end-to-end connectivity and continuity from dev to production. And then we have things like Power Automate and the Power Platform that allows you to, or allows citizen developers or hybrid developers, as apparently they're named these days, to tag into your solution exactly with the same identity system that we offer you. Now, at this point, I want to jump quickly to a demo. I can't remember if I have the demo slide somewhere else, but let's jump to a demo. So I did say that we just announced a brand new library that allows you to authenticate quickly and work with the Azure Identity or the Microsoft Identity Platform very quickly. The name of that library is Microsoft.identity.web. It's specifically designed for ASP.NET Core. So if you are creating solutions for ASP.NET Core 3.1 and later, then you can leverage this library. There's it just hit version 1.0 yesterday. So you are probably the first ones to officially hear it outside Microsoft, unless you're reading our blogs, which I don't think they have come out yet. As you can see here, 6 days ago, but we are making the announcement this week. And this means that the library allows you to move very quickly and very easily. So 1.0, whoop, whoop, exactly, Adam. Now, let me show you how that looks like in code. And I'm not going to ruin the surprise here. So let me just close this one. Don't save. And I want to do a file new project. One thing I had to say that it has not been integrated into our templates yet. So when you go into ASP.NET Core and then you select the project, let's name it Web Application 8, because I'm not that eventful. If we change the authentication and say I want to use Azure AD, this will not allow you to bring the new templates down yet, but that's coming very, very, very soon. So we're still working on that. If I create a project, it will come as blank. It won't have any authentication whatsoever. So just to show you how, and we'll also add it here in the connected services, but here are connected services. So you'll also be able to see authentication here at some point. Not that one, that's the old one. Right, so in my solution, all I have to do is come into my project, add a package reference. Let me remember how to do that. I think there's a item group. There you go. We'll grab not all that. I'll just grab one thing I need here. So Microsoft.web. I don't need the other stuff. And I also need for the UI component, right? So there's a UI element there. Or is it UI? I can't remember. Let's save that. It's restoring, installing, done. Now if I switch to my startup.cs, and if I come into my configuration and do, actually, let's add the using. And in here, we can say services, add Microsoft Web Authentication. You need to pass the configuration. And this is you. This is all you need to do to add authentication to your apps, to your web apps. And down here, we just need to make sure that we have app.use authentication. And with 2 lines of code, I was able to add authentication to my app. Now, there are a couple of things missing from here that you might say, well, Christos, is not all done. In the app settings, we need to add an app registration for our configuration to work. And in here, we need to add, I think, nope. And this one is the one that tells our UI to go and speak to the right endpoints. So if you are creating a web app today, that's all you need to do, a single line of code. If you are creating a web API, let's add a web API project here. So add, I know how many of you have done secure web APIs. Again, put it on the chat or raise your hand, but new project. Web APIs have always been tricky because you had to actually, web application. You had to actually manage the JOT token. It is an API, isn't it? Blazor web app. Yeah, I think it's here. Let me just next rename that. Yeah, a few of those. So we always have to manage the JOT token, and we have to know exactly what's happening and how it's happening. So for me, it was always a little bit daunting dealing with APIs. See, as we have added so let me go here into my project. Let me be lazy, sorry for that. Grabbing that, and I will come back to my API project up here. Open this one. Let's add the appropriate reference. Now, we don't need the UI because APIs don't have a UI. So they expect an access token to be passed into the solution. So with that restored, should be done by now. If I come into my startup, inside my services, then we can say services.add Microsoft Web API authentication, right? And again, we need to pass the configuration. And let me just resolve the missing. Oh, did I do it already? Seems I did it. Yes. Okay. Now this is it. The front end, whether it's an Angular or React or another API, another web app, anything, or a front end, it can be a console app, can hit our API. The API will look into the incoming request and will try to validate the token. If there is if there's no token, and we have authorized request. So for example, here, there should be in our controller, there should be an authorized. So someone tries to hit this controller and we already have an authorized here. Then all the requests will come back as a 401. Now, you might say, well, Chris, that looks all easy, but what about, down flow API? So what if I have another API? Well, another easy one. So we can say enable token for acquisition for downstream API, which is fantastic. And then we can also do a token. So we can add, not only can we add a downflow API, but we can also add a distribution caches out of the box. If you don't have that one and you want to use one in memory, you can do add in-memory token cache, and can also add a session token cache. So we have something for all flavors. Something that we recently added in the 1.0 is that you can also now create and embed an API, like a downstream API, a custom downstream API that you own, and it can be added to the services and inherit this same authentication system, so you don't have to authenticate that API as well. You can pass the tokens directly from here. It's a one-liner as well. Now, inside your controllers, usually you have to not only make sure that you're authorized, but that you have the right permissions to execute what you need. That means that the token that comes in, the information that comes in, contains the right claims. So if we were to get here, we could do something like, shouldn't that be upstream? Well, downstream, upstream. I suspect that, it's down to naming, but I suspect that it can be whichever. HTTP context, or I think I have context here, is HTTP context. Let me just add. Is it? I think it's models, isn't it? Entity.web.resource and verify user has any accepted scope, and then that should be a string. Is going on here? Okay, and that's it. With a single line of code, you can now verify whether the incoming user has whatever scope. So here you could have user.reads, you could have calendar write, and any other permissions that you need to have in there to make it work. So I don't know if you ever remember doing that, but if you're creating a greenfield project and you need to validate scopes, then that's okay. Can you also tell us a bit about scoped access to specific endpoints in a specific controller? Is that the one that I'm just explained, Dan? Oh, sorry. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So this is the one. And also, again, as I did say, you can have an injected service here that inherits that authentication model. And yeah, it uses the same technology for downstream APIs as well. So from my perspective, I don't know if you've been following, but it's been, what, 4 lines of code to get everything up and running for APIs, and like 3 lines of code for web apps. So from my perspective, this is super, super impressive. We've abstracted a lot of the complexities. This thing is built on top of MSAL. So the same experience I had with MSAL, but we abstracted a lot of complexities to allow you to quickly get out of the, can you still do scope via policies? Yes, you can do that. Absolutely. Yep, that's absolutely fine. Yep, you can do that. And in fact, I think they added a new way of authorizing. There's a new extension there for authorizing as well. Let me jump quickly back to my slides. So as you saw, we simplified sign-in, we safeguard access. You can build new experiences with Graph, and we can help you grow adoption, especially if you are publishing apps that other people will be using in Azure AD. Then you can also have a publisher verification, which allows your company to be to prove that they are who they say they are. So you don't push apps there that pretend to be Salesforce when you're not really Salesforce. We talked about Microsoft Untitled Web. So it is supported for 3.1 and later. It supports Blazor, WASM, and Server, web apps and web APIs, and gRPC as well. In fact, I have a blog post coming out later this week. If you're not doing Microsoft Untitled Web, so for everything else, we have MSAL, and that's for .NET. I need to kill somebody about the lowercase .NET because that's not on brand. JavaScript is not branded correctly as well, Python, iOS, macOS, and Android. So all the major frameworks that you want to use. So, and here, part of .NET is also Xamarin. So if you're a Xamarin developer, that's part of .NET. SignalR. SignalR is running on top of 3.1 as well. So yes, although I haven't really put it to the test, I think that's a very good example. I think something that we need to do on our stream at some point. Now, if you don't want to use our libraries, I did mention that you can also bring your own libraries, anything that supports OpenID Connect, like PyOIDC, OIDC client, Passport, ModAuth, OpenID Connect, and Java, and what have you. Integrating single sign-on, that is a fantastic tool as well. So if you are creating line of business apps, either for mobile, web, or desktop, then Azure AD and OpenID Connect allow you to easily integrate single sign-on, so your users don't have to sign in and sign out every single time. SAML integration and mobile single sign-on. Passport is still a thing. It is still a thing, actually. Yeah, it's also one of the recommended ones, but you don't have to use Passport. Any OpenID Connect library fill is supported. Developing your favorite language, best-in-class authentication libraries, secure by default, and with Graph API, you can build much richer experiences. See, I love this slide over here. Usually, this is the point that we do the demo, and you can see that Maria over there is showing the Midwestern United States map. But the demo that goes with this one is here. So if I were to go back into one of the older solutions that use OpenID Connect, here, this is how you would, yeah, man, poor Bob, he's been put to the corner there. So if I actually zoom out a little bit, no, I did not want to do that. I wanted to zoom out, and Control minus doesn't work on VS. So as you can see here, we have quite a few lines of code starting at 34 all the way down to, I would say, there. So 129. All these things can be actually replaced by a single line of code. So I could just grab all that. Delete that and replace with a single line of code. So for me, it is a major validation that the library is doing an amazing job. Obviously, this only works in 3.1 and later, but if you have the capacity to upgrade your projects into 3.1, they can oversimplify the authentication and authorization bit there. And you can have multiple policies as well. So you can see here, there's another policy for B2C. So again, you could do the same. You can have one for Azure AD and you can have one for B2C, and then have different policies depending on how you want your users to interact with your app. So as you can see, even Bob can do that. Everybody can do that. Hopefully everyone like you can, or like me can do that, okay? I don't want to cover this once again, but as I said, the older libraries also were pointing to the V1 endpoints. We did not have things like incremental consent. So you had to request all the scopes up front. It was quite tiring. It did not scale as well. You had to configure MSAL yourself. You need to actually roll out your token cache, and you had to have a token cache. As you saw, for us, it comes out of the box. And you also had to hook into the OpenID middleware events. Whereas now, we provide you with access to the V2 endpoint by default. We have audience validation by default out of the box. The MSAL is configured. So not only do you acquire tokens for your local app, but if you need to call other APIs downstream or upstream, as Dan said, then that's included in there. MSAL is not separate to the authentication bit. It's built on top of MSAL. So a token acquisition, token management, and authentication is all built into the library. The JOT or JWT bearer middleware is configured with Microsoft Addendum Web, and we also have on behalf of flows inside Addendum Web, especially for other things. So how does this fit in the overall picture? You can still use the independent components. Like you don't have to use Addendum Web, but I think these days, if you see the light, then it's very hard to go back to darkness. So all these different components that made the part of authenticating and validating users and then getting their tokens in order to speak to APIs and downstream APIs, they're all covered or encompassed inside the Microsoft Identity Web. So we create a superset, a super library that allows you to work with all these things. Dan Clark, my question wasn't about what you call it. It was about whether the method name in the library is correct. Oh, pull request, I suppose, or you can create an issue on the GitHub repo and then people can take into consideration. If it has lots of upvotes, I don't see why they shouldn't rename it to Upstream API. But yeah, it's done in the open. I don't know, when they were discussing the whole thing, I think that's what was decided to be called. Apparently internally at Microsoft, they call it downstream. You can still, there was this thing. Anyway, for ASP.NET Core, again, we've oversimplified many of the things that you had to do here, especially for token requests. Now we have a single call to acquire the token for downstream or upstream API, if that ever changes. And for validating incoming requests, you just making sure that if you enable these, then we'll do the validation. The 401 and 403 responses will be done out of the box for you. You don't have to handle that yourself. So we've done the demos here. I don't know how many of you use Graph today, or if you ever had the chance to use Graph, but it does provide you with a very good opportunity to enrich your users' data by pulling information from your own enterprise. Now, this only applies to enterprise solutions, so Azure AD. So for B2C, if you're creating business to consumer apps, there's no Graph API for you to leverage. And that's something that usually confuses people, unfortunately. But B2C is only for organizational data. That's your SharePoint data, your calendar, your emails. And it becomes very simple to integrate with these things. I don't want to cover too many things about Graph, but again, you can use it on any app, whether it's a web app, desktop app, Power Apps, and it pulls all the information from the organization to bring it forward. Lots of people create lots of stuff. B2C, I did cover a little bit about that. Sorry, I'm a little bit pressed with time. So what I was going to say is that B2C allows you to create a personalized experience. So unlike Azure AD, which has a very Microsoft look and feel, you get redirected to another page, you come back with a token. B2C can actually look and feel like your app. It doesn't have to be just a web app. It can be a mobile app. It can be anything that has a UI can be fully customized. So for your customers, it shouldn't look like an alien experience. It shouldn't be like a third-party integration there. You can make it as part of the flow of your app, and it gives them that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling that they're always staying inside your app and they're authenticating with that. Again, eliminate friction. I want you to all think about the Azure AD or the Microsoft platform as the tool to allow you to create secure apps, no matter where you run them. So you don't have to run on Azure. You don't have to use .NET. Any language and any platform allows you to use Microsoft Identity to secure your apps. Again, we're just on time here, but I want to remind everyone that we are streaming about these things. We build stuff online on the 45 show, and I like to join different user groups and conferences and speak to you guys about the stuff that we're building. So thanks for having me. And I think I have a couple of questions. Paul is saying, I believe that Azure AD B2C allows using a locally hosted SQL Server instance to store the actual user data. Yeah, you can have a custom policy to say, I want to store the data somewhere else, but what other, if any, metadata might remain in the cloud? If you are storing your information locally, I think it creates a map between your local users and the metadata. So not everything is stored in your local environment. There is some data that is still stored in the cloud. I don't know exactly about what metadata you're looking for, but I can find out for you if you want to follow offline. And for AJ, is it possible to transition from an in-house user repository to leverage Azure AD or B2C? For B2C, if you want to use your custom existing SQL library, yes, but I wouldn't recommend that because you don't get the scalability of the cloud. So part of the exercise would be to pull your Azure AD, sorry, not your Azure, your AD or your in-house user repository and inject them into Azure AD bulk upload, either via Graph or through a different task like PowerShell. And that will create the user objects in either AD or B2C for them to be able to use. But you don't have to move off the on-prem. So for example, if you want to run your applications on-prem, you can still authenticate against Azure AD, or you can federate your local repository, if it's AD, to Azure AD and then use Azure AD for authentication. So far, everything seems to require Azure AD to work. Does ADFS fit into this anywhere? No. Azure AD is the endpoint that you need to hit. So unless I've missed something, it feels like this could be used to replace Duente Identity Server. Duente is doing quite a few things there, and they have really good solution. But from my perspective, if you're looking for a delegated authentication, a system that you don't have to manage yourself, it's totally PaaS, right? Or not even that, it's SaaS. Then B2C is the way to go, or Azure AD, depending on the solution that you're building. It's not a direct one-to-one replacement because, as I said, Duente is doing quite a few things. But yeah, it is totally possible. Do you expect the VS template to include a new identity system? Yes, we are. Hopefully, we'll land this by .NET 5 release, but I'm not committing on a hard date for this one. And yes, Duente is self-hosted, whereas this one is hosted by Microsoft. So Microsoft maintains and stores the data and is responsible for runtimes and what have you. Guys, I really have a hard stop. Thanks very much for having me. Thanks for all the questions. I will make the slides available to you, and I will link to the blog that has most of the code samples here. Again, thanks for having me, and I appreciate all the questions and the interaction. Have a great afternoon, and stay safe.